Good morning, everybody at East Rose, and thanks for the invitation to be with you this morning in this format anyway. I do look forward to getting together again when we can see each other face to face and breathe the same air and all of that. So today's program is called To Tell the Holy, Storytelling and Spiritual Practice. And we all know that every faith tradition, spiritual tradition, religion has a host of sacred stories, a holy manuscript, you might say. Um, I found out years ago by reading Parabola magazine that one particular writer, anyway, said that the word myth in the Navajo language actually means to tell the holy. And I think that as well as all the spiritual traditions having a holy manuscript, that there's also something like that inside of all of us too. Holy stories, holy lands, holy people that reside. And I do love to read the old stories from the spiritual traditions, whether it's Genesis and the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, or the many tales of the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. I love the Australian Aboriginal idea of song lines, that all of existence was actually sung into form. The vibration of song created matter. Um, I think all of those stories attempt to help us to imagine our own lives, to help us to find our place in the vast cosmos. And I had a great professor of history at Marquette University when I went to school there, and his name was Robert Hay. He was from East Tennessee. And I'll never forget the first day of class, he said, Ladies and gentlemen, I believe there are four questions we need to address ourselves to. And those are these. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? And what in the heck should we do while we're here? Furthermore, I don't believe science will ultimately answer those questions. I believe stories might be a better guide. I always loved uh, how he spoke and how poetic he was in his teaching. But what I loved about that was that he helped me to realize that stories could be a valuable resource in helping us answer those questions, which I think, to me anyway, are ultimately unanswerable in any concrete, literal way. Uh, those questions are things that human beings really can't wrap their minds around completely. So we approach them with imagination. We we bring our imagination to them and use story and poem and song and metaphor to talk about them. And a great writer, Karen Armstrong, who wrote a great book called A History of God, among many things, she said in it that religion is as much an art as science. Religion requires a great deal of imagination and creativity. And I love that idea. Well, I also like the idea that it's important at times, I find anyway, I get inspired by, reading the Tao Te Ching, or reading the poetry of Rumi, or Hafez, or Pablo Neruda, or picking up the Bible, or playing with the I Ching. I think all those spiritual traditions, to me, help to nourish me. Uh, but I also think there's a host of holy stories that we all have. These are you might say moments when we felt like spirit broke into us or broke out of us. Some moment we had some soulful connection with the world, something like that. And are people that we know that stood as examples to us as being holy people, spiritual people. And one of the reasons I think it's important to remember that is that just as it's inspiring to consult the old traditions, I think it can be equally inspiring to be in touch with our own spiritual myth and our own holy stories. So, well, how do we do this? Well, I taught this program actually as a workshop years ago, and I did this. We had about 12 people in the workshop, and I asked them to write about 3 people in their life who they consider to be spiritual people. And I said, there's many, many forms of spirituality and spiritual expression. And just as one example, I talked about a priest that taught me in high school, Father Carlton Witten. And he was a man of the cloth. He was a holy man. He was dedicated to service, but he was an excellent piano player. He directed the musical. He taught us Shakespeare. And he was a man who was, on one hand, meditative and a man who you could see was devout, and yet he loved the world. He was full of joy. So that was just one example for me. So I asked him to write about 3 people. Took about 10 minutes to do that. And then the next thing was that tell us about the Holy Land for you. What places are holy places to you? And it can be holy for lots of reasons. Maybe it's some mountaintop that you go to meditate upon. Maybe it's a place where you met somebody, something happened. Who knows? Once again, there's many ways that lands become holy, or that we feel we're in a sacred place. What are some of those places for you, and why? Take us there. Show us what they feel like. The third thing was describe to us a couple examples of what you consider to be a spiritual experience in your own life. And these can be, miracles or calamities. Sometimes I say spirit breaks into us. Sometimes spirit breaks out of us. Sometimes we break down, and that's a way of having a spiritual experience. I also said include as well what I would call soulful experiences. Oftentimes where we may be in grief or may be confused, but we can also feel more deeply connected to the soul of the world, sometimes even through our tears. A teacher I had once said that a spiritual experience is sort of like climbing a mountain. You gain altitude, you get light, you get heat, warmth, you see further, you have a vision perhaps. Soul experiences are more like coming down the mountain, right? You get more deeply involved with humanity. You feel more deeply connected. So I just said write about a couple of those experiences, a spiritual experience, a soulful experience. And then the last thing was write about some spiritual tradition that nourishes you, whatever it could be, whatever books or poetry or teachings or dance or whatever. And then what's some practice that you have, some spiritual practice. And this could include, like I mentioned, carpentry. And that's a spiritual practice for me because it slows me down and I just get involved for hours and I feel connected to the eternal. I love working with the elements of the world. I love working with, dirt and concrete and wood. And I always feel like moments of creativity like that, of building things, that I'm in a timeless place. So that would be an element of spiritual practice for me. So we wrote about those things. Now, for today, maybe to inspire your discussions, if you'd like, you might just consider one person in your life who had some type of spiritual expression or spiritual character that you noticed. And a second thing could be some place that is part of your holy landscape. And the third thing, one experience of maybe spirit breaking in or breaking out, or some soulful experience, a deeper connection to the world. And then the fourth thing is, what is a spiritual practice for yourself? It could be gardening, singing, whatever it is, but just to share that with one another. And I wanted to share one thing with you, a person who has always represented an aspect of spirituality to me. And her name is Naomi Shaib Nye. Some of you might know her. She's a poet. And what I've always loved about her is that she's a brilliant poet. She really is dedicated to her craft. But she's an even more brilliant human being. She's very inclusive. She's very warm. She's very humble. She's a great teacher. And she really helps to shine a light, I think, on the genius of other people. She wrote this particular poem that I'd like to recite for you. It's called Kindness. And it goes like so. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake with sorrow. You must speak to it until your voice catches the thread of all sorrows, until you know the size of the cloth. Only then is it kindness that makes sense anymore. Only then do you realize that it's kindness that ties your shoes and sends you off into the world to mail letters and purchase bread. It's kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world and says, "It's me that you've been looking for." And then it goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. Kindness by Naomi Shaib-Nye. Well, I wanted to tell you one other story as briefly as I can, even though it's a massive tale. I've told it as a performance, but uh, it stands out to me as one of those old stories that I found that really helped to shine a light on a spiritual predicament and split that I had felt in my life for a long time. And to me, I think that's one of the values of stories, whatever they are, myths or fairy tales or fables or movies or books, is that they can sometimes help us to reimagine our lives, help us to understand our lives better. And this was a story from ancient Ireland. It's called the Legend of Tuan McCarroll, and I'll try to condense it as much as I can because it's a long tale. So in the story, there's a priest. He's the head abbot of a monastery up in Moville, which is way up in Donegal, and his name is Saint Finian. Well, before that, it was just called Finian. Now he's a saint. It's one of the great venerable saints of Ireland, Saint Finian of Moville. But when he was alive, this was in the 5th century, after St. Patrick had come. And Finian was the abbot of Moville. And he found out there was a man in his own parish there that lived out in the woods who still practiced the ancient ways, the ways of the pagans and the Druids. And that was offensive to Finian. So he went out to baptize him, to convert him. And he got to the stronghold of this man, whose name was Tuan McCarroll. And he said, Tuan, open your doors, let me in. I want to baptize you and bring you home to the one true faith. And Finian waited and waited, and finally Tuan opened a window up there in the 2nd story, and he said, I welcome your new God into the world, but I am quite happy with all the gods that I have, and I don't need to be baptized. I've been baptized many times. And he closed the window, the shutter. But Finian wouldn't leave. He stayed there. And finally, Tuan let him in. And Finian told him all about the life of Jesus Christ and the death and the resurrection. And Tuan listened for hours and hours. And finally, he said, "That's a remarkable story." He said, "I want to thank you, priest, for coming, for sharing that with me. I have much to learn from it. That gives me a great deal. It's a wonderful story." But Finian said it's more than a story. It's the one true story about the one true God. Tuan said, "Well, I believe there's many gods." And Finian said, "Well, tell me about your own life, because if I'm going to minister to you, baptize you, I need to know about your life." And Tuan said, "Well, sometimes it's better to forget than to remember." But Finian, he said, No, you need to tell me, who was your father, and tell me about your life." Well, Tuan went on this amazing story about how he first came to Ireland thousands of years ago and died and was reincarnated as a stag of the woods, died, lived another century as a boar, died, lived another century as a hawk of the air, died again, came back as a salmon of the sea, and in that way was swimming around, and finally was swimming in the River Boyne, where the king of Ulster, Muradag the Red, he caught him one day in a net and brought him home. And the queen of Ulster, she favored the fish, and she said, "That fish is for me." And she ate the whole thing over time. And in time, the spirit of Tuan went into her womb and grew. And then she gave birth to another human being. And Tuan McCarroll said, "And that's myself. That's how I came into the world in the form that you see me now." And the priest was sort of aghast at this incredible tale. And he said to Tuan, he said, but look at the good news here. You've become a man again while I am here. And so I can baptize you. And I can bring you home to the one true faith. So at last you can live again with your true Father in heaven. And Tuan McCarroll says, "Well, I am home. I don't need to go to some heaven. I'm at home here. I love this world. It's filled with mystery. I consider this earth to be the womb of life and the tomb of life. I've been living here for a long, long time, and I walk upon the graves of many who have lived before me. And I'm enchanted by this world. I love the mystery of this beautiful maiden, the earth, this goddess, the earth. I love every wind and weather of her. I love all the colors of her. This is my home. But Finian said, if you don't allow me to baptize you, you will know doom someday. And Tuan simply said, I've known doom many times, and it's never had power over me. I don't fear doom any longer. Let doom come. And they say with that, Finian, he crossed himself. And the two men sat quietly as the fire died out. And the next day they parted amicably. But Finian returned to the abbot he returned to the monastery of Moville, and Tuan McCarroll remained where he was. And they say Finian no doubt prayed for the soul of Tuan McCarroll for many, many years. But eventually Finian died, and eventually he became Saint Finian of Moville. And they say, as for Tuan McCarroll, nobody really knows what happened to him. Some say that he could be a hawk of the air, a salmon of the sea. Some say he's a bellying stag of the woods. Some say he's yet a fierce boar in the forests. But they say that Tuan McCarroll yet may be with us to this very day. Who knows? It's only a story. Well, I tell you that story today, or the gist of it, because I was raised in the Roman Catholic tradition, and I'm grateful to it for spiritual education and for many fine teachers and the example that I had of many people who were dedicated to service and to a life that was dedicated to something that was ineffable, that was spiritual, that was dedicated to the timeless ways, the timeless world. But also it was difficult for me at times because as Tuan McCarroll, I had a really profound relationship with nature, and even though I went to church a lot, I always felt like my real church was out in the woods. And so I really like it when I related to it when Tuan told that whole vast story of his relationship with the world, and then the priest tried to draw a circle around it and say, yes, but isn't it nice that I'm here to baptize you so you can come home to the one true God? And I like it because Tuan, he just, I think, drew a larger circle. He said, well, I am home. I don't consider this to be a rehearsal for another life. This is my life. And I'm quite content here. And I don't need to be baptized because life has baptized me. You know, he's been baptized many times through death and rebirth and death and rebirth again and again and again. And I also like it because Tuan said that he had much to learn from that story that was told of Jesus. He had much to learn. And yet he didn't agree with the priest that it was the one true story. Tuan believed that there were many stories and many gods as well. And his heart and mind were open to what all of them had to say. And so when I heard that story, it just, you might say, elucidated for me a split that I've had inside for a long time. And it was interesting to see it played out as a story from the 5th century. You know, this stuff has been going on for a long, long, long time. So hopefully, and I'm sure that many of you find stories that shed light upon your own spiritual history and tradition and that kind of thing. I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you today, and also for your patience in watching a video like this. And I wanted to finish with a prayer that is from Black Elk, the Oglala Sioux holy man. It goes like so. Grandfather, Great Spirit, once more, behold me on earth, and lean to hear my feeble voice. Lean to hear my feeble voice. You lived first, and you are older than all need. You are older than all prayer. All things belong to you. All things. The two-legged, the four-legged, the wings of the air, and all green things that live. You have set the powers of the 4 quarters of the earth to cross each other. You have made me cross the good road and the road of difficulties. You have made me cross the good road and the road of difficulties. And where they cross, this place is holy. Where the good road and the road of difficulty cross, this road is holy. Day in, day out, forevermore, you are the life of things. An earth prayer from Black Elk, a holy man of the Oglala Sioux. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for the opportunity to share some time with you. I wish you all well and look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.